Hi church, today we are continuing our series doing some overviews of the early books in the Bible, and today we are looking at 1 Kings, of course, which follows on from 1 and 2 Samuel, which you would have heard over the last few days, and if you haven't, maybe it's worth going back to listen to those books, because 1 Kings follows on from 2 Samuels in a historical way. It's a sequel to Samuel, and 1 Kings and 2 Kings is not to be mistaken for an economical or a political or a social book. It is very much focused on God, just like all the other books. It has a story to tell, and it has some really teachable applications which we can kind of reflect on today as we look over the book of 1 Kings. Of course, 1 Kings is based on kings, it's based on leaders, it's based on, more specifically, the relationship between the leader and God and the impacts of those relationships. Was the leader someone who obeyed God? Was the leader who was someone who recognized God as someone who is all sovereign, all powerful, in control? Was the leader servant-hearted to not only to God but to God's people? And if so, what was the impact? What did that look like? What was the outworking of that? And if the king of the time wasn't, then again, what was the impact? What was the outworking of that? What did it look like? Of course, we see a lot of kings in the northern area of Israel and Judah disobey God. And we see a lot of instability and a lot of violence in those areas. And we also see characters who obeyed God, who were brilliant servants to God. Of course, 1 King starts off following the rulership of David to Solomon. Solomon, who built a reputation upon his own wisdom, upon a relationship with God. And of course, Solomon's entire life was one big building project to build the temple so that people can worship God in it. And of course, as we read through 1 Kings, we see the prophets of Elijah and Elisha, who again serve God very well, are the mouthpiece for God to the leaders of the time, and are very instrumental in the book of 1 Kings. You know, as we just have looked very, very briefly over the book of 1 Kings, we see the importance of a relationship with God. We see the importance of having a covenant with God, of knowing God for who He is, and therefore knowing who we are, the part we have to play. Because some of us are privileged enough to have leadership roles within the church, within our workplace, within our family, within our own social setting. We may be identified as leaders or people of influence. I believe we all are people of influence. And 1 Kings reminds us that God has positioned us in that place for a purpose. And it is not to ignore God. It is not to stop talking to God. It is actually to grow closer with Him and to actually reflect God's will on the people we spend our time around, and not our own will and not our own selfish intentions. And that is a key lesson we see in 1 Kings. Thank you.